We are very, very happy to be joined to discuss all the chicanery going on regarding this money that's been sent for war and other things by Amanda Yee, who's a journalist and the managing editor of Liberation News. Amanda, thanks so much for being back on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Always great to be back.
Well, great to have you as always. And I mean, I'm sure people have, well, I don't know if they have seen the headlines. There's been a lot going on, but this $95 billion for various wars. And I think they stuck in a number of other things there as well, including some related to TikTok. So maybe just to start us off, I mean, what is this sort of monstrosity of a bill that just passed and what does it cover?
Yeah, it's basically like a huge military spending bill. Like you said, there's like different components of this bill, but it's all packaged up as a national security measure, right? There is a military spending part, and then there's a TikTok ban provision that they sort of attached at the last minute. This package bill passed the House on Saturday, and then it passed the Senate earlier this week, and then President Biden signed it into law yesterday, right? So think about this for a second. From passage through both houses of Congress to Biden signing it, this took overall less than a week. And that shows you exactly where the government's priorities are, right? Think about how quickly this was pushed through compared to other bills, bills that address infrastructure, that address student debt, healthcare, or any kind of public service or good. Those usually take months to negotiate and pass. That is if they pass at all, right? Oftentimes they're just indefinitely stalled, but this took less than a week. So that really shows you where our government's priorities are. And what was really dark and ironic was that when Biden signed this bill yesterday, which is overall like a $95 billion military aid bill, he celebrated its passage by saying, he was quoted as saying, "It's a good day for world peace," only to a few minutes later promise that U.S. weapon shipments to Ukraine could be shipped as soon as within the next few hours. Wow. So like I said, there's like the 95 billion military aid part, and the breakdown of that is 61 billion is going to Ukraine, 8 billion is going to Taiwan, and then we're going to send another $26 billion to Israel in order for it to continue its genocide against the Palestinians. We're sending more aid to Israel now, despite 67% of Americans supporting a ceasefire. And all the while, infrastructure is crumbling in the US. People are increasingly unable to afford rent, groceries. We can't afford healthcare, but we always somehow manage to have unlimited funding for war, unlimited funding for police, right? And it really shows you capitalism's priorities. And it cannot be overstated that the US government is about to start a third world war on multiple fronts right now, through a proxy war against Russia, through arming Ukraine, through its increasing escalation and aggression against China, plus the very real threat of unleashing a regional war in the Middle East through its unconditional backing of Israel. So that's the first component of the bill. The second component is this provision that House Republicans snuck in. It's a McCarthyite provision that would force ByteDance to sell TikTok or face a ban in the U.S. And this part of the bill was actually snuck in at the last minute last week by House Republicans. They've been trying over the past few years to pass this TikTok ban legislation. It's failed to pass and failed to gain any kind of popular support. There have been different iterations of this TikTok ban that have stalled in Congress, but they knew that if they attached it to this giant military spending bill, it would pretty much guarantee and expedite its passage, right? So basically, this legislation would give ByteDance 9 months to sell TikTok with the possibility of a 3-month extension if a sale is already in progress. So the passage of this legislation package, it reveals two things. First, that the U.S. ruling class is more committed to imperialism and keeping the war economy going rather than helping its own people. The only people that really benefit from this kind of continuous war are weapons contractors, CEOs, who have seen stocks surge from the war in Ukraine and the genocide in Gaza, as well as investment firms like BlackRock and Vanguard, who hold investments in Israeli apartheid. And the second thing that this reveals is that no matter what superficial disagreements Democrats and Republicans may have publicly, that these two wings of the ruling class stand united on U.S. imperialism and protecting U.S. capitalist interests.
Amanda, that's a really good point about noting the way that both parties came together for this. When they want to work together, they absolutely can. But I think another interesting element to the various aspects of this bill is how it brought together the various lobbying apparatuses. Is that a word? Sorry, guys. Wow. But it brought together the various arms of the sort of weapons industry, military industrial complex lobbies. Whether we're talking about the anti-China wing of that or the anti-Russia wing of that, it's often the same thing, but not always, or the pro-Israel wing of that. So I just think that's the interesting element when it comes to the TikTok ban, especially. So it's just wild to see the Israel lobby take on this issue of trying to get TikTok banned. On top of course, getting Israel, pushing for Israel to get more weapons and funding. So can you talk a little bit about that element? Because I think this is the kind of like new aspect to this. I mean, obviously, there's been an attempt to get TikTok banned for quite a long time from the right-wingers, from the anti-China people. But now you have a direct role of the Israel lobby because they see TikTok as providing this sort of means of spreading information by a younger generation that is outside the confines of the corporate media. So it's calling it a genocide. It's telling the side of the Palestinians. It's also showing you what Israelis are posting to social media. So what was the role of the Israel lobby in pushing for this very anti-China measure? And why?
Yeah, I think that's
I'll say that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a really good point in that TikTok is the perfect target because it represents like this kind of perfect confluence between like the US new Cold War on China, big tech lobbying, and then like this heightened public consciousness around the issue of Palestine among Gen Z, among youth, right? Those are really the three major reasons that the US government is trying to ban TikTok. And none of those have anything to do with national security, right? A while ago, I read this quote from a spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. He said in March, he was quoted as saying that the U.S. should stop overstretching the concept of national security and abusing state power to suppress Chinese companies. And this is exactly what's going on here, right? Yeah. There are three major reasons why the government is trying to ban TikTok. The first is, the one that we've talked about a lot, which is the new Cold War on China. That the banning of this app is just another front in the US tech war against China. It's part of a digital containment strategy to really thwart China's economic development through tech innovation. So this TikTok ban can be understood as part of the same strategy as sanctioning Huawei or the US strategy of banning the sale of advanced semiconductor chips to Chinese companies. It can be understood as part of the same strategy as Biden's recent massive investment in US chip manufacturers like Intel. In March, Biden granted them nearly $20 billion in loans and grants to try and basically cut China out of the global supply chain because the US they just can't compete with Chinese tech. They're trying to save US capitalism by thwarting Chinese tech innovation, right? The second reason that they're trying to ban TikTok is, as you mentioned, Rania, like the power of big tech lobbying and just US capitalists trying to ensure American tech dominance across the industry. TikTok has 1 billion users worldwide. 150 million of those users are based in the US. And the overall time that users spend on TikTok now far exceeds some of its US competitors. And it's been like pretty rapidly pulling away digital advertising from these same companies. So Silicon Valley represents a really powerful political lobbying force in Washington. Meta itself is a major competitor of TikTok, and they have actually paid consulting companies to create campaigns to depict TikTok as a danger to US society and American children. And so the US government is trying to force the sale of TikTok to a US company or ban it entirely, which would drive its users to US competitors like Meta, Instagram Reels, which is also owned by Meta, Snapchat, or YouTube Shorts. And, all of these apps are really struggling to compete with TikTok right now. The third reason that they're trying to ban TikTok, which I think is the most critical right now, is this circulation of like Palestine content and Palestine content going viral. Since October 7th, youth especially have increasingly turned to social media platforms like Twitter, like Instagram, and especially TikTok to get real on the ground coverage in Gaza. And TikTok has led to the popularity of a group of very young Gen Z Palestinian journalists like Bisan and Maltaz that people in the US have become really attached to and rely on for truthful reporting from Gaza. And people are learning really quickly that mainstream corporate media outlets are presenting like a kind of a distorted view of the genocide that serves U.S. government interests. And you can tell how scared the government is by some of the public statements that they've made, right? During the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing back in January on big tech, Lindsey Graham, during his questioning, he brought up how the TikTok representative in Israel resigned because supposedly he said that TikTok spreads pro-Hamas content and that the app is being used to help destroy the Jewish state. And then like shortly after October 7th, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, in a leaked phone call, he was quoted as saying, we have a major TikTok problem. We have a major Gen Z problem. And, like I said, TikTok is actually the perfect target because it kind of represents this confluence of this heightened consciousness among youth regarding Palestine and the U.S. Cold War on China. A lot of the renewed drive to ban TikTok has been pushed by the Zionist lobby or Zionist organizations. And there's been a real concerted effort to tie TikTok to the supposed rise in anti-Semitism and then trying to link that to China. So they're essentially trying to blame China for what they call an anti-Semitic wave sweeping the country, which is actually more often than not just people speaking out against the genocide of Palestinians. The president and the CEO of the Zionist group Jewish Federations of North America, he was quoted in a statement as saying, TikTok has helped fuel a horrific spike in anti-Semitism that our communities are feeling every day, and it's time to take action. And, in the same statement, the group said, TikTok's parent company is beholden to the Chinese government, which has squarely positioned itself against Israel since October 7th. China has filled its state-controlled media and social media channels with anti-Semitic and anti-Israel rhetoric. And then I just came across this quote from Senator Pete Ricketts of Nebraska yesterday, and he said, nearly a third of adults 18 to 29 in the US are regularly getting their news exclusively from TikTok. Pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas hashtags and videos have more reach than the top 10 news websites combined. This is not a coincidence. The Chinese Communist Party is doing this on purpose. They're pushing this racist agenda with the intention of undermining our democratic values. And if you look at Columbia University and what's happening across campuses right now, they're winning. So obviously, everyone is really scared that the Zionist narrative around Palestine is crumbling. So yes, the US government has been trying for years now to ban TikTok, but the mass movement that's been growing since October 7th, which has, elevated the consciousness around the question of Palestine, especially among youth, is really what has led to this new push to finally ban the app.
Wow. It's just... Wow, it's through the looking glass on this one. But, on a related note, Amanda, I want to, before we let you go here, speak to, you were talking about the three legs of the war funding. I feel like the $8 billion to Taiwan has kind of flown the most under the radar in terms of the sort of general conversation. And obviously that's $8 billion to help them upgrade their military and buy parts. But, talk about, what's dangerous about this push, because I think that sometimes people feel like, oh, it's kind of benign, right? Taiwan Taiwan, small place, China, big place. We're just giving them some weapons. It seems like almost benign self-defense. So, I mean, talk about what this is really about.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of China's military encirclement strategy. It's a major component of U.S. containment strategy toward China. And it really, part of it, it's mostly based around surrounding the country with a chain of military bases and hostile military alliances. And that includes like arming Taiwan in order to thwart off the potential of what they see as a Chinese invasion. And I think they call it the porcupine strategy. But this is a really dangerous escalation. U.S. officials in Congress have, continuously been pushing for full militarization of Taiwan, urging the Biden administration to basically flood the island with weapons and employ what's called a porcupine strategy of basically like asymmetrical warfare to deter any kind of invasion by China. Obviously, this is a dangerous and reckless maneuver that would effectively force Taiwan into an arms race. And, the goal of this military encirclement is basically to enable Washington to barricade China's military inside its own territory, and then through these sanctions and tech containment strategy, potentially cripple its economy in any kind of future crisis, leaving China with no other option but to fight its way out of containment. So basically, the arming of Taiwan is part of this U.S. government strategy to actively push China into a direct military confrontation. And that is so dangerous.
Either you fight or you capitulate. Here we are, nuclear powers on the brink. But yeah, that's where we are. Well, as always, we really appreciate you being willing to help us sort through all of this, Amanda. Amanda Yee, journalist and managing editor of Liberation News. Thank you so much for some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.